Very warm welcome to you, Mr. Lévy. I've been looking forward to this, as I'm sure all the audience here has. There's a lot to talk about. We have an hour and a half. I think we get round to a lot of subjects. Anti-Semitism, the crisis in Europe, the state of affairs in the Middle East, the role of intellectuals, and, if time permits it, we could talk about women as well. But let's see about this, maybe towards the end. It's a favorite subject of mine, at least. But anyway, I'd like to start, since you're a guest in our country, we should begin with what's going on in your country. And France has caught the headlines recently, not just because of President Hollande's ménage à trois, but more importantly, well, sorry, I should say that. I'm sorry, Ambassador. But more importantly, because of what is going on the cultural scene with this controversial comedian, Dieudonné Mbala. He's caused a frightful stir in France, as you know, and he was recently banned entry into United Kingdom. Now, in your opinion, is this Dieudonné mainly a clown who is holding on to his 15 minutes of fame, or do you think he represents something more sinister, something which is lurking in your French culture?
I think both are true. He had his 50 minutes of fame, for sure, and he will not have 16, because the decision of the French government of Manuel Valls was very wise and good. Even on the short term, it seems to give him publicity and to make him a sort of martyr and so on and so on. I think he's approaching the end of the 50 minutes. But it is true also that Dieudonné is or was the name of something else, much more deep, much deeper, much more down-rooted in our country. And it is true that even if, for God's sake, the Republican institutions are strong, the political class from right to left has condemned without any ambiguity the phenomenon. It is true that there is a sort of new wave of anti-Semitism stemming out of the French society since a few years, maybe a little more. And Dieudonné is the name of that. Dieudonné is the symptom of that.
And what is that new anti-Semitism made up of? I mean, how is it different from classical, you could say, Christian anti-Semitism?
Number one, there is not one classical anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, if we stop 5 minutes on that, maybe 5 minutes would be enough, because I often say that anti-Semitism is not my problem, but the problem of the anti-Semites. So
but it could become your problem.
Yeah, I hope not. I don't think so. But let's stop 5 minutes. There is a history of anti-Semitism in Europe. It took different shapes and faces. It is like a virus which muted, which changed. The question of anti-Semitism throughout ages is to formulate itself in a way in which it can be accepted by a lot of people and through which it can become a mass movement. For example, there was a time where the true language of anti-Semitism was Christianity. There was a time when Jews were accused to have killed the Christ, and that for this crime, supposed crime, they were supposed to be prosecuted. Then you had a second period in the time of Enlightenment when it became exactly the opposite. In time of Enlightenment, Christ was not so well famed, as you know. Écraser l'infâme de Voltaire, Voltaire, Diderot, all the movement of Enlightenment was anti-Christianity, anti-Christ. So Jews were guilty not to have killed Christ, but to have invented Christ. It was a second guiltiness, but in the name of that, you had again a real strong wave of anti-Semitism, making Jews guilty of that. After that, in the 19th century, third quarter of the 19th century, you had the development of the new biology And as a sort of canceric, like a cancer of this biology, the new racism with a new paradigm of anti-Semitism. You had some people throughout Europe who said, we don't give a damn if Jews have killed or invented the Christ. Our problem is that they embody a race which is like a poison.
They're inferior, simply.
And so on. Then you had, in the time of Dreyfus affair, a fourth in France, but it spread in a way in big parts of Europe. Another one, which was a socialist, leftist anti-Semitism, saying that the Jews were synonymous of plutocracy, banking, Rothschild, and so on. And then a new mass movement raised saying that Jews had to be hated because they were oppressors of the humble and the little, blah, blah, blah. Today, since 60 years, all these paradigms are abolished, are impossible to express loudly and in a large scale. Nobody can, except little sect of little marginal sect, nobody can, sectarian people can say these paradigms. But there is a new one which has begun to grow since maybe 20 years, and which expresses itself through new words, new arguments, and new condemnations. The Jews which are allegedly allowed to be hated are Jews who are supposed to, as a whole, support an illegitimate state. Israel, this has a name, anti-Zionism. They are supposed to, in order to support this state, to have invented or exaggerated their own martyrdom, Holocaust, denial of Holocaust. And they are supposed, by doing so, by stressing upon their own real or imaginary martyrdom, they are supposed to cast a shadow on the martyrdom of other people, Palestinians or whatever, or descendants, inheritors of slaves, and so on. Competition of victimhood.
Right.
So if, and my belief is that if anti-Semitism has to come back in Europe, it will come back at the crossroad of these three formulas, of these three accusations: anti-Zionism, denial of Holocaust, and competition of victims. And why was Dieudonné important? 15 minutes, because he was the one who was about to take these three threads, like in electricity, like when you, a court-circuit, a shortcut, he was the one who was at the edge of putting the three threads together and then to provoke something which could look like what we knew in the past.
Right. And Dieudonné, speaking of anti-Zionism, he comes, as you know well, from the anti-racist background. I think he was a co-founder, or at least he was active in SOS Racism.
No, not SOS Racism. No, but let's say...
I stand to correction. Anyway, that's what it said in the Danish newspaper. But the thing is, the guy has a declared anti-racist position. All he says, apparently, is that it's a perfectly legitimate position to be against Zionism, because Zionism, as we all know, is a political ideology. So you can easily be against Zionism and not be against Jews as a people or an ethnic group or religion. Doesn't he have a point there?
No. First of all, it is not true. When you look at his spectacle, his shows, which are in reality meetings, he goes much further than that. He says, for example, you will find this is documented, you can find it on any Google website. He says that, for example, that between, I quote, Jews and Hitler, he has no duty to choose, that he's neutral. He said that a few weeks ago. Between Jews and Hitler, I don't choose, I beg for neutrality. He says things like that. I don't even want to repeat it.
No, he's a bizarre character.
It's like dirty for all of us. So, first of all, he is not. It is not only anti-Zionism, but the way everybody is allowed. Of course, democracy means that you are allowed, not only allowed. You have the duty to criticize the government of a democracy. You have the duty, if you are a free citizen, to criticize the government of Denmark, if you are Danish, France, if you are French, and even if you are not, you can express opinions on government of my country, I could on your government, and same for Israel. To express opposition to the policy of a government or another is not only permitted, but it's a duty. When the problem arises is when people like this guy say that Israel as itself is an illegitimate being, that it is an impurity in the pure land of Middle East, like that it is like a canceric cell which has to be expelled, and that the Jews in Denmark, in France, and so on, are guilty of being complicity with this illegitimate, racist, Nazi, blah, blah, blah state. This is anti-Zionism.
But the thing is, the supporters of Dieudonné, and of course this bizarre character himself, are saying, look, if you put up moral borders and say, I cannot propagate this idea, I cannot say that Israel should be exterminated or that Shoah or the Holocaust did not take place or it did not take place in the circumstances that we know. Should we just let all these, maniacs have their say in the name of our much heralded freedom of speech, and then just counter-argue, present it with facts and say, look, it's just your silly opinion, we know better?
There is you may think this way, of course, and there are many arguments in favor of this position. It is not mine. For one reason, I think there is no... If somebody comes and says that Denmark is a country of Africa, what can argue? There is no...
You can agree, because it is. Well, no.
There is no argument.
Okay.
If somebody arrives at the time of... if somebody says that Tycho Brahe, great Danish character, was wrong, and that the sun, the earth... what can we argue? There is nothing to argue. So we cannot, the scientists, the historians, the honest people have no time to lose to discuss such evidences. So, to discuss the reality of Holocaust, come on, there is so many important or beautiful things to do on Earth, why lose? And number two, my conviction is that these sort of arguments of these people, they have a sort of... they can spread because they appeal to something which is not rationality. They appeal to something deeper in the mind, in the heart, in the body of the people. They can have a sort of viral, like a virus way of spreading. And my position is that the Republican Pact of the democracies after Second World War has been interwoven, has been done on the basis of the refusal of that. Everything is sayable in democracy, everything. You can laugh at priests, you can cartoon rabbis, you can cartoon, like a great newspaper in this country did, imams, you can laugh after politicians. The basis of our social contract in most of countries in Europe is the no more, not again extermination of no more genocide, no more apology of genocide.
So we should agree on facts, certain facts that we need not discuss. On the other hand, if we say to the Dieudonnés of this world, no, you cannot deny Shoah, you cannot say that...
I say you can deny in your kitchen. You can deny with your wife.
But he wants to deny it in public.
But you cannot deny in public. You can deny if you find a little, I don't know, publisher who wants to print your stupidities, do it. But you cannot do it in Le Monde or in Politiken. And I must say that Politiken or Le Monde would not give to a Dieudonné or a Forisson the right to express that. So the point is, they may do that in private circles, but to spread the public space, which is devoted to Republican arguments, to debates of ideas, to a strong opposition of conception of world, to invade this with these killing words, with these words which are potentially murderer, this, my conviction is that it has to be, it is for, in my country it is forbidden, in France, there is laws against that, right. And law has to be applied.
Of course, but on the other hand, rather than creating a martyr, you know, if Dieudonné says, look, how come I cannot in public, I have to go to my kitchen, I have to bitch to my wife about the Jews, how come I cannot do it in public?
He's not a martyr. He's not a martyr in France.
But we risk making, the society.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't believe in this risk because the French society is more mature than you seem to say, and more wise. No, problem is not that. You have in France a minority of people who want to believe, who want to hate Arabs, who want to hate Jews, who want to believe that 15,000 of Roms are enough to create a big disorder in France. They want to believe that. You cannot do anything against this. You have a majority of people who don't put their finger in that, in anti-Semitism, in racism, or in anti-Rom. What a honest state has to do is to give weapons, to give tools, to give arguments to the majority. What Manuel Valls did by forbidding Dieudonné, he said to the 80, 90, 70, I don't know, proportion of of honest French, that they are right to believe that Dieudonné is a fool, that they are not the fool, that he is a fool. In such a battle between Democrats and anti-democrats, you have to weaken the anti-democrats, but you have also to reinforce the Democrats. You have to give them some ways of increasing their own beliefs, and that is the role, the task of the law. That is why it was right to repeat the law.
And you may call me naive, you may call me too young or too oblivious of history. Too young, well, I'm bald and wrinkled. I'm not very young, actually, but anyway.
And I'm not so old, actually, too.
Yeah, it is. So you're taller, smarter, wiser, richer. Anyway, the thing is, you may say that it's a bit naive, but on the other hand, we as society, France, Denmark, the Western world, we stand on pillars of wisdom, of facts. We know about this. We do not have to actually pass laws in order to stop the likes of Dieudonné. We can say, go on with your stuff, little boy. We have our own facts. We know what actually happened. You cannot deny this.
Problem is not that, my dear. The problem is that today in France, you have some neighborhood where if I was a more devoted Jew than I am, if I wore a kippah, I would be beaten physically. This is the situation in certain neighborhoods in France. Why would I be beaten as some young Jews are beaten? Because I would be supposed to be the guilty of complicity with the Nazi state of Israel, because I would be guilty of inventing and contributed to invent the myth of Holocaust and so on. So these ideas make, the problem is that could make the life, if they were spread more, they make already the life difficult for some Jews in France, thanks God, a little minority of them, and could make the life even more difficult for a lot. You remember the Ilan Halimi affair.
Right.
You know that. Ilan Halimi was a young Jew. He was tortured to death exactly because of this interconnection of arguments which Dieudonné is laughing at. And he was not chosen by chance by the gang of Barbarius. They tried before him. We have exactly the track record of the gang. They tried 2, 3, 4, 5 before, who did not fall in the trap. All of them were Jews. All of them were supposed to be blah, 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 and so on. So the school of Toulouse, where a young French called Mohamed Merah killed, as you know, same. If there was not the risk of murder, if there was not the risk of being beaten if you wear a kippah, if there were not the risk of being insulted in the street, okay, maybe they could express their stupid points of view, but this risk exists. 2 weeks ago, there was a demonstration in Paris of people supporting this guy, Dieudonné. And there were some boards in the demonstration saying, like this, Jews, France is not a country for you. So, thanks God again, the government, the opposition, everybody said, this is not possible, this has to be forbidden, no compromise with the worst. But thanks God they did it. Thanks God. Me, as a Jew, maybe I have a more comfortable life, not maybe for sure, than some others. But I would not like to live in a country where it would be admitted that because Israel would be a Nazi state, because the Holocaust is not so clear, I could be expelled from France, at least in the mind and in the purpose of a part of my co-citizens. So at the end of anti-Semitism, there is murder. At the end of racism, there is murder, or the possibility of murder. When I founded SOS Racism, I contributed to found it 30 years ago. Problem was not the Jews. Problem at this time was the Arabs in France, or the French of Arab origin. And there was one murder. And there was some young French of Arab which were beaten because they had the skin a little more brown than yours or mine. Thanks God, SOS Racism was founded with the support of the state, and there was a real wave of racism which was more or less stopped, or at least slowed down, cooled down. And this is, in democracy, this is good. This is good. You cannot let people who have a resentment against society, against themselves, against their own life, whatever, to say it is the fault of the Arabs, it is the fault of the Roms, it is the guiltiness of the Jew, we should expel, we should beat, or we should murder, and then the society will be more breathable for me. You cannot. If not, the society is not breathable any longer for anybody. The social pact is broken.
Yeah, and I've met French Jews in Israel, for instance, a couple from Marseille, I recall, who a couple of years ago told me they actually more or less fled France. They lived in Marseille. Maybe there is a particular problem there. But they actually left France for Israel because they found the climate, the political and cultural climate, unbearable for Jews. And you're touching upon something. I'm not a religious person, but I brought this little cloth you're talking about, the kippah. And apparently, not just in France, in this country, probably other countries as well, it's difficult for people who go to the temple or to the synagogue to actually wear this. And My frustration, so to speak, is that it's not really being addressed very much. It's considered to be more or less a Jewish problem. Is that how you see it as well? I mean, you said that the political establishment came out in defense against some of the Jews who felt threatened. But in everyday life, in those neighborhoods you talk about, where young guys are afraid of wearing the kippah, are they getting any help from sort of the outside system? Is that problem being seriously addressed? Because we're going back to what we saw in the 20s and 30s in Europe.
It's as long as there will be one youngster afraid of wearing a kippah, it will mean that there is not enough support and enough effort, of course. But one must honestly say, at least for France, that there is a real support, a real effort of every institution, political party, newspaper, which count. There is no breach in this Republican superstructure. It is a battle. You know, as far as France is concerned, my country, exactly one century ago, there was a newspaper in France called La Croix. La Croix, which is today one of the best daily newspapers. One of the best as far as deontology, information is concerned. 1 century ago, the baseline of La Croix, the sentence which was the flag of the newspaper, the thing they were the most proud of was le journal le plus antisémite de France. The pride of La Croix was that, 1 century ago. So there was a battle between decent Democrats and anti-Semites. At this time, I fear that the anti-Semites won the battle.
But if there is a newspaper that prints Le Journal plus anti-Sioniste today, if somebody put that proudly saying, look, we're the anti-Zionists.
I tell you a story.
Let me just ask the question. We're here to listen to this gentleman, I know, still, just a question. If a newspaper actually put, we are the most anti-Zionist paper in France, would you consider that just a political statement, or would it have the undertones of being anti-Jewish as well?
I was a little quick with the reply.
You're a philosopher?
But I got the question. I tell you a story. 40 years ago, there was a group in France, a group of Maoist, extreme leftist students, of which I was close to it, which was called La Gauche Prolétarienne. And I remember one day, I was with a group of friends and with a man called Bernard-Henri Lévy, my homonym, who was the chief of Gauche Prolétarienne. And the Gauche Prolétarienne had a newspaper called La Cause du Peuple, the cause of the people. And I remember Place de la Sorbonne, a young guy selling La Cause du Peuple. He said, achetez la cause du peuple, achetez la cause du peuple, le journal le plus antisémite de France. Then Bernard-Henri Lévy said, no, not le plus antisémite, le plus antisioniste de France. Then he said, I'm sorry, le journal le plus antisioniste de France. So, you know, it's so close, it's so close. It is, and it's so clear that anti-Zionism is a nickname, an acceptable name for the old La Croix of the La Croix of the thing. So I would not like, no, to have a newspaper saying le journal le plus antisioniste de France. And I don't like also to go to the end of my argument. I don't like also those who say, and this is a commonplace in European arguments, those who say that the core of the problems of Europe, of the world, the real danger for the peace of the world, is the question of Israel. This is a very well-known theory. You know, there was a poll 7 years ago, a poll in all Europe. a list of countries was given to a representative of saying what is the biggest danger for the peace of the world. In the list, you had Iran with the possibility of nuclear weapon. You had Russia with half of Chechnya erased from the surface of the earth. You had China with the problem of Tibet. You had America, which is not always a model of peaceful country. You had North Korea with Mr. Kim Jong-il now. You had Israel. And you had the little Israel. And who was the winner of the match? Of course,
let me guess.
Huh?
North Korea?
Unfortunately,
yeah, I know.
It was Israel.
Yeah, of course.
Israel arrived on top of the list, European poll. It was the biggest danger for the peace in the world, according to a majority of Europeans. So this, the argument we are talking about can also take this stupid shape. And when you say that, and I think to precise people in my country, but I am abroad, I'm not going to name them. When you say that, you become blind to so many other problems. Of course, Israel-Palestinian problem is very important, and I am myself involved in this question since 40 years. I'm in favor of a two-state solution, in favor of the rights of the Palestinians, and so on. I said that so many times. But if you say that it is the most hot problem in the world, if you say that if we solve that, then a reign of peace will arrive in the whole world, what about the forgotten wars in Africa, which have nothing to do with Palestinians? What about the problem of Kashmir, which has nothing to do with Israel? What to do with the outcasts in India, the untouchable, who never heard neither of Israel nor of Palestinians? So one of the terrible effects of this focalization on Zionism, one of the terrible effects of this anti-Zionism having become a whole program itself is that you put now, yes, a real shadow on the majority, maybe the whole of the actual suffering of the planet. You have a lot of people in South Sudan, in Darfur, in Nuba Mountains, for example. If you say that the point, the focus has to be this bloody Zionism, they can go to hell.
You just took away my illusions. I thought by solving the Israeli-Palestinian problem, we could solve traffic problems in Copenhagen and, various other new small problems. But never mind. I think one of the key questions, I read a couple of years ago, this book, which I really find very brilliant, Left and Dark Times, written by you. You confess to be an homme de gauche, a man of the left. On the other hand, you are very critical of a lot of the progressive causes. Why don't you think that the progressives of the left are more serious in addressing the anti-Semitic issue?
Why do I think that they are more...
Why do you think they are not more in the forefront, so to speak, of addressing this problem?
They are. A lot of them are. No, I don't think so. For example, the president of French Republic today is absolutely clear without any back thinking on this question. No, I don't think that the left. It's not a question of right or left. It's a question of the equation, the theorema I tried to sum up at the beginning of our conversation. And this sort of argument draws its strengths from left and from right, from both. And for example, anti-Americanism. The idea that America is the empire, that America is the evil, that America is another center of the holy damnation. Is it an extreme leftist argument or extreme rightist? It is both. In France, it took birth on the right side. the fascists of the 30s invented anti-Americanism. They invented on a very, very clear and theoretical basis. And then it was adopted by the left, and it came back to the right. And today, you have these men, you are Dieudonné or another man called Soral, who comes from the extreme left, who now is with Jean-Marie Le Pen and Marine Le Pen. They build a sort of strange component, rouge-brun, red-brown, a sort of, like in Nazi Germany was called the beefsteak sections. You know, when the Stalinists decided to infiltrate the Nazi SA assault sections, these sections infiltrated by the Stalinists, by the Communist Party of Germany, they were called section beefsteak. Red inside, brown outside. So today you have this again, sort of beefsteak sections in France, in Germany also. Denmark, I don't know enough.
Or maybe you have the opposite. You have people who are red on the outside and very brown on the inside.
Yes. That's what, exactly.
Okay.
You have the escalope.
Escalope. Yeah, but my reason for asking this, it's basically for you to sort of try to dissect what is left of the left, because, I mean, you have a position which is considered to be leftist somehow. That's your political tradition, that's your background. On the other hand, you're very critical of the progressive ideas, the anti-Americanism, the anti-Zionism, the a lot of things. So, in your opinion, as a leftist thinker or intellectual, what is left? What can be used of?
What is left of the left?
Yeah.
For example, many things. For example, to think together and to implement together the motto of French Republic, but it works everywhere: freedom and equality. Equality and freedom. The world is full of people who say, let's forget equality, let's take care of liberty, of freedom. And others who say, we don't care about liberty because liberty is a sort of, is a way to give the liberty to the wolf in the, and so on. So, who say, a real leftist, for me, is the one who tries to think and to implement together equality, egalitarianism, and la liberté. How would I say that other way? To discard the Tocquevillian argument,
right,
who said equality leads to totalitarianism. He did not say it this way, but there is a tendency. And to discard the Marxist argument, who said liberty is the way to fascism and so on. So neither Tocqueville nor Karl Marx, this for me is one definition of a possible left today.
Right. I mean, could you put a name to that person? Because I'd like to meet him.
There is a lot. In Germany, you have a lot of the German left who took birth after Second World War, who made its mourning of section beefsteak and so on and so on. They are on this position. In France, a real part of the Socialist Party is on this sort of position. They try their best. And the best of the best, I would say, of the left, is this part who thinks that the best way to combine the two, the aspiration to equality and the dream of liberty, is to take seriously the word fraternité, brotherhood. Brotherhood is, and again, French motto, liberté, égalité, fraternité. But France was, Révolution Française was in a way the first one. So my belief in this book, you quoted, is probably that to try to give its real meaning to a brotherhood, which property is to combine the aspiration to freedom and to equality. But this is one way. Another definition, another reply to your question would be probably to combine the two in heritage of anti-totalitarianism and anti-colonialism. This is the left of today. You have some leftists who try to choose between the two. You have people who in Europe who, in name of anti-colonialism, in the memory of the anti-colonial fight, say, when a state who was a colony, who was oppressed once upon a time by Europe, does disgusting things, we cannot condemn him. Or we have to be very careful before condemning. Example, Sudan. Sudan of al-Bashir, who made an attempt, at least, of genocide in Darfur. Right. You have some leftists who say Europe cannot give lessons to al-Bashir because in name of anti-colonialism, we have to have respect, whatever he does, to a man who is the inheritor of those who fought against colonialism. On the other side, you have anti-totalitarianism, which says that you have human rights is the key and the body, that victims of violation of human rights are not have no political colors, and so on and so on, and that al-Bashir should be condemned if he's guilty of genocide, even if Sudan comes from a dirty and nasty colonial story. So to combine the two, to be faithful to the two traditions, to be faithful to Frantz Fanon and to Václav Havel, to be faithful to Jean-Paul Sartre and to Solzhenitsyn. And Jean-Paul Sartre was faithful to the two in a way. This is to be a leftist nowadays. Another reply. You can have more.
I'm sure I can. And these are some very good and international perspectives on what it probably is to be a leftist. But I think looking, I don't know the French situation too well, but looking here in this country, Germany, Great Britain, etc., you find that there is a lot of disillusionment with the left. There are voters, intellectuals of all sorts of kinds, politicians who leave the left, who say, look, the left has sold out, it's betrayed itself, there is no soul left. Part of the left is moving to the right of what it used to be, so the left is becoming more and more centrist. So do you think there is any chance, say in, I mean, I know you're not a fortune teller, but say in 5-10 years from now, that real radical leftist ideas, neo-Marxist beliefs will get a ground, will get a saying again in European politics?
Probably, yes. Probably because ideas are never only ideas. Ideas rely on deep passions in the social body and in the body and the soul of each of us. Marxism. Why was Marxism so? Why was the idea of the Marxist revolution so popular in the previous generations? And why could it be popular again? Because it relied on very simple ideas. The idea of the new is better than the old. The idea that the youth is better than the ancestors. The idea that purity is better than impurity, for example. These are the primary numbers of political passions. A revolutionary of Marxist tendency, Leninist, Cambodian, and so on, was somebody, for example, who said that purity was desirable and reachable. A lot of us are ready to believe in purity. Purity is a very good, a very nice word. Purity is a great dream, except that when you say that a society must be built out of the principle and out of the will of purity, then the trouble begins. And then the risk arises to try to identify the source of impurity, when you have identified it, and if you keep your will of purity, why not try to expel it out of the social body? And if it is embodied, this impurity, in some concrete bodies of rich peasants under Stalin, of intellectuals wearing glasses under Pol Pot, or embodied by Jews under Hitler, why not decide to purify the society of these bad insects? So the problem with these radical ideas like, not Marxism itself, but sort of, is that it is not only abstract arguments. They are really rooted in some very, very strong passion. When you look, for example, at the beginning of the communist movement in Europe, the idea of the new world, the idea of the youth of the world, the idea of this old dream to break the history of the world into two and to reinvent a new man, brand new, purified of his old bad tendencies and so on. This idea was, in a way, enthusiastic. There is a lot of great writers all around Europe. They were not bad people. They were just seduced and enthusiastic at this idea of resume the history of the world, finish with this history of misery, which is the history of mankind, and to try something else. In a way, it can be considered as a noble aspiration. For sure, it is a deep wish in the soul of each of us. And this is a fuel which really feeds these ideologies which you are alluding to.
And with the crisis that is definitely very visible in Europe, the political crisis, the socio-economic crisis, there is probably some scope for believing that these radical beliefs of impurifying society will probably gain a stronger position in the years to come. When you look at Europe right now, from your perspective, do you think that we are somewhere towards tackling the crisis in a proper manner, or is it just getting worse?
It's difficult to have a simple reply to that. My feeling, I'm not an economist, but it seems to me that the financial and economic crisis has been handled not so bad. If you compare the way it is handled today with the way it was handled in the 30s, for sure there are some lessons of the past which have been learned, and there is some mistakes which have not been done this time. So my feeling is that we have to, if you see this country, if you see Iceland, if you see France, if you see even Greece, it is not so bad. It is not so bad. And there is also a wiseness and intelligence in the peoples who accept some very difficult decisions which have a high cost in their ordinary life, because they more or less understand the lessons of the past. Now, I would like to add two things at that. First one, there are some people who nevertheless want to say or try to say or begin to think that there is some scapegoats for the crisis. I see what happened, this incredible discussion in this country about Goldman Sachs and his 17%, etc. 19%.
Very important,
okay. Yeah. I don't know, there might be a discussion, maybe I'm not aware, but the way it has burnt, the intensity of the discussion, the way Goldman Sachs has been considered for a few hours or a few days as the real embodiment of evil sounds bizarre, frankly, for somebody who knows the history of the 20th century. It sounds bizarre. And
why is that?
Because I don't know well. I'm sorry if I interfere in the national, the big national debate of these days. But
no, there are only French people here.
But to take 90% of a company which remains with a state control and so on is not a big affair. First,
well,
no. There is a know-how in this bank which can be useful for this company. And what we heard, what I heard in the debate was something else. Something as the impurity as money as such, the danger of American empire as such. Goldman Sachs had the Troja horse of America itself. My belief is that today there are some imperialism today, and we have to be very careful against imperialism. But I don't think that America is the real danger.
No, I understand that. But I think the core, the principle here is that people, those who are critical of the Goldman Sachs story, think that it's a betrayal of a socialist principle to sell out to the very company that is associated with the financial crisis. So selling out to a greedy company is not a very good thing. But then I cannot say this because I work for Danish national TV. But some people say that.
The real betrayal of socialist conviction is to accept the fact that Vladimir Putin dictates his law to Ukraine. The real betrayal is to shut one's eyes when you have some Democrats on Maidan Square in Kiev, who are tortured in a very strong way, to accept that from Putin. The real betrayal is to accept the very concept of Putin saying very clearly that he wants to extend his influence. He does not say his empire, but he says that the fall of the Soviet Empire is the biggest catastrophe of the 20th century. As you know, this is a betrayal of the socialist belief. The betrayal of socialist belief is to say nothing, because it was once upon a time a poor colonized country when the ruling state when the state in China applies death penalty, impose some conditions of working which are unbearable and out of any human decency, and when they begin to exert a real economic imperialism in some areas of the world, maybe we don't care, but I care, which is Africa. Today, you have a real imperialism in Africa. It is not France. When France goes to Mali with Denmark, it is not, or to Centrafrique, it is to prevent a bloodbath. It is not imperialism. The French companies and the Danish companies, I speak under the authority of the journalists who are here. I don't know many Danish companies who are very strong in Centrafrique and in Mali. But you have some Chinese companies today who arrive, who buy the land, who organize a way of working and so on, which is a real empire. So to betray the ideal of socialism is to be blind to that. And when you continue to shout against American empire, you are just out of frame, out of focus. You are in the past.
But speaking of the American empire, as we all know, the 20th century has been called the American century. And there is also a belief now that we are 14 years into the 21st century, that this American century with its ethics and revolutionary spirit is slowly coming to an end. I don't know if you agree to that, but do you think it's dangerous if the world loses its one and only superpower, which a lot points to?
But it has lost that. That's finished since a long time. You have a superpower who is China. You have an attempt of superpowering, which is the new Russia. You have some countries like Brazil and India who are taking some weight. So there is no longer one superpower reigning over the world.
Monsieur Maître, you make me look really bad, as if I didn't know. But
I'm sorry?
No, the thing is, I like you, I realize that America is no longer playing the role of the policeman. On the other hand, there used to be one, after the collapse of communism, there used to be one superpower, this hyperpower. And as you say, it's no longer there. And is the world... maybe it's too simplistic a question, but still, is the world becoming more dangerous in lack of a strong overall superpower?
No, the world is dangerous when you have superpowers who are not democrats. This is a danger. The world is always dangerous because we are not living in heaven and because we are not living in purity. So it is always dangerous, but it is more dangerous when you have superpowers or when the most super of the superpowers are totalitarian states, then the danger begins. As for America, I know a little America as you do. I spend some time regularly, and I wrote a book a few years ago. My real concern today is not maybe the reverse. My real concern is to hear more and more in ruling American circles that they don't give a shit, they don't give a damn about what is happening in Ukraine, in Arab world, or in Africa. This has an old name in American policy, which is isolationism or Jacksonism. In America, you have four big tendencies in American policy. You have Jacksonism, Jeffersonism, Hamiltonism, and Wilsonism. The first one believes that America has to be secluded behind its borders and don't take care of whatever the world can fall. It is not their problem. Jacksonism means to react only, to intervene only when the interests of America are concerned and are struck. Hamiltonism consists in saying that America has to take care when its commercial interests are involved, and Wilsonism, from President Wilson and so on, is to be aware, is to consider that the fate of democracy all over the world is also an affair which concerns every man on earth, including the Americans. Today, Wilsonism is on the back, on the retreat. And the Jacksonism and Jeffersonism are on the front. And this concerns me more than anything else. More than anything else.
But isn't that in part down to what you could call a political own goal, in the fact that we saw in the second half of the 1990s and early beginning of the 21st century, we saw this advocacy of democracy. The neoconservatives were quick to advocate the spread of democracy. So isn't there some reaction to the American empire? Because people got fed up with this. They said, no, look, it's a Western idea. You cannot just bring it out and make it universal.
Yes. I don't think... The neoconservatives made a terrible mistake in Iraq, which was a mistake from top to toes. It was a mistake to go in Iraq and to topple Saddam Hussein the way it was done. Because you cannot decide democracy you cannot send democracy like a bomb or like food in parachute. This is sure. Nation building supposes some democratic forces on the ground. It supposes a will of the people and so on. So the way the neoconservatives handled and decided the war in Iraq was a mistake. What was not a mistake in this former leftists who became the neoconservatives was to deny the fact that democracy was a Western idea. And they were right to say that. Democracy is not an idea reserved to the West. Why should it be? Why should it be? I'm not sure that it was, if you really look at the roots of the democratic ideal, it is much more complicated than a Western idea. And the minimum we have to ask to not even to a leftist, but to a human being believing in the common birth of human gender is to believe that democracy is good for everybody. Now, there is some work to do. There is some grounds to work on before seeding democracy, or in the very moment when you put the seeds, of course. But to say that democracy is an idea devoted to West and only the West is just a nickname for racism, I'm sorry. So the neoconservatives fought this idea in America, and this was not bad. Unfortunately, the travaux pratiques, the application of that, was this terribly stupid war in Iraq. And it is true to say that we are seeing today the counter effect in America of this mistake.
I remember back in 2005, I think, I interviewed Richard Pearl, who's considered one of the architects behind neoconservatism, himself also a former leftist. And he said, yeah, a lot of people will disagree with the basic ideas of neoconservatism, and they will say, look, you cannot propagate democracy by the bayonet or by weapons. On the other hand, and that was his point, we are spreading ethical values. America, you know, the American revolutionary spirit is about ethics. So he said, at the end of the day, the world would become more ethical. So what's your take on this?
We'll see. I really believe, but this is such a commonplace today that I don't know if we have to insist on that, but that this war in Iraq with some false and crook supposed representative of the democratic people in Iraq, with a bad military preparation of it and so on, was badly handled.
And not very ethical.
Now, maybe not very ethical either, no. Now, probably, yes, nothing is, in these sort of matters, you cannot say that it is all dark. Probably there are some seeds again of ethical values which have been given. I hope so. I hope so.
But we are looking at a world which seems to be less in order compared to 10 years ago. Of course, I'm sure everybody here knows that you were very influential in making sure that France intervened militarily in Libya back in March 2011. But that was the last time we really saw Western military commitment, not just by France, but by other forces, Danish airplanes included. But in Syria today, Damascus, Aleppo, everywhere, people are saying, where is the West? What's good about the West if you cannot help us? We are like 2-3 hours away from Brussels, Paris, Vienna. We are dying by the thousands, and you're doing nothing. Do you think that the West, France, the United Kingdom, America, as we're talking about, have sort of become, you know, war fatigued? They don't want to intervene anymore. It's too complicated, it's too costly.
War fatigue, probably, yes. Too complicated. I think it was less complicated it would have been less complicated to intervene in Syria than to intervene in Libya. Less complicated.
What makes you say that?
Because at the beginning of the war of Assad against his people, he was more isolated in the Arab world than Gaddafi was, because he did not have the African shield which Gaddafi had, because there was at least one big country in the area, one strong, little but strong country, Israel, who was clearly in favor of toppling him. So there were many reasons which made the toppling of Assad less difficult than the one of Gaddafi. Even the geography, which was so often invoked in order to explain the non-intervention, I think it was more difficult in Libya. In Libya, between Benghazi and Tripoli, there was such a distance. It was nearly, after the intervention in Benghazi, it was nearly impossible, as the military says, to finish the job. It was during the Second World War, we knew that the Battle of the Desert, it is impossible to win. If there had not been the idea of intervening from the Jebel Nafusa, it is a long story. It would not have been doable. So, for many reasons, at least it was not more difficult in Syria than in Libya, at least. The point is that the West, accepted, maybe the West leaders were less convincing. For sure, Obama decided not to go. He went on the back seat of the car in Libya. He decided not to go at all in Syria. And this, for me, will be a real bad shadow on his years in power. And the two rogue states, which are Russia and China, maybe because they learned from the Libyan story, were stronger and more active in the UN, in the Syrian case than they were in the Libyan case. Many reasons, but the result is 130,000 deaths.
It is. And the thing is, back in early 2011, just in the wake of the 17th February revolution in Libya, you were able to, as I understand it, actually more or less persuade then President Nicolas Sarkozy of the importance to intervene militarily. Now, I don't know if you are in close contact with President Hollande or his advisors, but apparently you or anyone else, influential intellectuals, are unable to get the politicians to act unanimously on Syria. We're more or less selling out. And what is equally bad, seen from a European point of view, is that there seems to be some sort of apathy in our public. We don't really care what's going on in Syria. It's not our headache. So what can be done to address that? I mean, are we just leaving the Syrians to the same fate as some European countries did to the Spaniards back in the 30s during their civil war?
What can I say? Of course, you are right, and I am. This makes me mad personally. Makes me infuriated to think that, and to think.
It makes me mad too. Let's act.
And to think another thing, and to think something else. The non-intervention in Syria had two consequences. The first one, which is the most terrible, is the 130,000 dead. This is absolute tragedy. The other consequence is that we did really feed the beast of the jihadism in Syria. In 2011, you had face-to-face Bashar al-Assad, supported, by the way, by the jihadists of Hezbollah and Iran, and you had a strong democratic movement. 3 years after, the democratic movement is on the retreat, nearly vanished, or is in the process of vanishing, and you have an increasing jihadist movement who preach, look at this coward Western world, who abandoned you Syrian people. We are jihadists, the only one to take care, to be concerned and to help. Give us your votes, give us your wish and your will. So we have also the responsibility to have created in a country who was not a fatherland for jihadism, which was one of the most civilized. Damascus was one of the most civilized cities in the world.
It was.
Yes. we have created this, we have contributed to create this two-head monster, Bashar al-Assad and Hezbollah, and jihadism and Al-Qaeda face to face.
So the Syrians are left with the worst of two alternatives, secular dictatorship or religious dictatorship. No real democratic alternative. But what really worries me is, in the quick or short-lived period, which was known as the Damascus Spring, back in 2003, 2004, there were some Western politicians who went to Damascus. They had meetings with Bashar and some of his allies, and they were quick to stress the cultural, religious affinities between Europe and Syria or the Middle East. What about this now? Who's stressing the affinities between Syria and Europe? Who's coming to Syria's aid? I don't see it. And the follow-up question is, how do we address this? How do we get someone to act on this?
I don't know. Frankly, I don't know. I am among those numerous, we are a lot in Europe, who tried their best by writing, by demonstrating, by speaking to the ear of the horses, or those who ride the horses at least. That we failed. What can I say? We failed. We failed in Bosnia during 3 years, and at the end we succeeded. Maybe something of this sort will happen in Syria, but at which cost and which Syria? The Syria of today, again, is not the Syria of 3 years ago. No. Now you have a strong jihadist current. In the Arabic world, in general, my conviction since the beginning of the riots in Tunisia, is the following. I never believed that democracy will happen from one day to another. Of course not. I'm not so naive. I know that democracy is a long process. Like I know that in my country it took 1 century to impose republic, for example, the République Française. I know that. But what I know, what I feel since the beginning is that in these countries, there is a race, a speed race, une course de vitesse, a speed race between the West and the jihadists, in order to know who of the two will topple the dictator. Who will take the credit at the end of the day? Will the credit come to the West, giving the proof that the West is not by an ontological law enemy of the Arab people and friend to dictators? Or will the credit go to jihad, proving that they are the only solution for the Arabic world? This is, if we try to be serious, this is the real great political question. In Libya, for example, Libya is not the heaven of democracy, of course. There are a lot of problems, some murders every day and so on, some jihadis, some Qaddafists and so on. But in the first and only free elections which Libya knew since 42 years, in July 2012, who was defeated? The jihadists. All the jihadist parties made a very ridiculous score. Who won the election? Ali Zaidan, who was a pro-Western, liberal, Democrat, and true Muslim. Why? Because the West had part of the credit. The real credit was to the people, of course. But the West did show the image of democracies giving the hand to a people trying to join the democratic club. So the main argument of the jihadists was cut at the height of the grass, you know.
So you're seeing some basis of optimism, at least, even though there are people who are quick to...
In Libya, yes.
In Libya, yeah. And Tunisia, perhaps also. But what about Egypt? I mean, we did see Morsi's Muslim brotherhood actually win the election. He was installed as president, and all of a sudden he was ousted. He was couped. It was a coup d'etat.
In Egypt, as far as I know, the West cannot ask the credit of having toppled the dictator. We really looked at the thing and the train go and so on. So the West now tries to do the best and so on and so on, but there was not a real effort of whoever, France, Europe, America, to support the aspiration, the spirit of Tahrir Square. The result is that we have the opposition of these two forces, which are on one side the fascist of the Muslim Brothers, Muslim Brotherhood, which is a sort of a form of Arab fascism, even historically. Muslim Brotherhood is the last pearl of the old Nazi oyster of the 20s and 30s. And on the other side, some militaries who claim to bring liberty back when they kill 1,800 or something like that, average people. So the situation is not good, at least. You have the counter-example of Libya, when it is not good either, but where you have in this big clash inside Islam between the moderate Islam and the extreme Islam, you have a real, for the moment, it may change. It's a long battle. Advantage to the moderate, advantage to the liberal, advantage to the pro-West.
But just outside of Europe, in North Africa and in parts of the Middle East, we have a clash between moderates and extremists. We have a clash between Shia and Sunni. We have, if we go to our continent, we have major socio-economic problems. We have problems with rising anti-Semitism masking as anti-Zionism. We have unemployment. We have a world which no longer has, and hasn't had for many years, one leader. I mean, one could become very depressed and you just start looking for a rope because, I mean, what sort of hope do we have? Please tell me. No, I mean, it does look very bleak, doesn't it?
I'm not depressed. I'm not depressed. No, I'm not depressed. Too many questions in one.
Pessimistic, maybe?
No, as for the Arabic world, what can I say? You said one thing before, which you said about the old order. I don't think that the order is good as such. And I don't think, for example, as a lot of people believe, that dictatorship at least brings stability. I don't believe that. I think that dictatorships are not agents of stability. It is a false stability. So in the Arabic world, there is a hope because there is a real fight today between the moderates and the extremists. Because there is some... In Benghazi a few weeks ago, you had a demonstration of women who came to the headquarters of the Muslim Brothers in Benghazi in Libya. They entered and they looted the whole thing. They put all the furniture out of the window and the Muslim Brothers escaped out. So you have this battle between a civilian society who wants freedom, who wants to be faithful to Islam, but to be brotherly to the West. And you have the Muslim Brothers who try to take advantage of the situation. This, for me, is hope, reasonable hope, because maybe the extremists will win. But at least democracy, for the first time, since long in the Arabic world, has a chance, is given a chance. Tunisia, same. Tunisia, I'm rather optimistic about Tunisia. Palestinian. I was recently in the West Bank. Gaza is one thing. West Bank is another thing. You have a generation of young Palestinians who are willing to join the ideas, and not only willing, they do, of democracy, of law of human rights, ready to recognize Israel and so on. So it is not absence of hope. Now, unemployment, Europe, there is no magic solution. But I believe, my feeling is that, as I said before, the crisis was not managed so badly by our governments, and I I think, moreover, that if we have the courage, the spirit, the energy to give a new move and a new trend and a new step to the European dream, I think it could embetter strongly the situation in our countries.
And what, in your opinion, is the European dream? Because when I listen to our dear chairman, Manuel Barroso, all he says, and please excuse me, but it sounds very technical, a lot of it. I can't really get the hang of his dreaming. So what, in your opinion, is the European dream?
He will not be our dear president for long, as you know. So let's wait a few weeks and let's wait for what happens next. What is sure is that there is a breakdown of the European spirit, the spirit of the founding fathers of Europe, not only Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman, but Edmund Husserl, Julien Benda is completely at a dead point. This is sure. What Europe needs today is a generation of leaders and a process of selection of leaders also who gives the possibility to make the link with this glorious past. Today, Europe is a market with a bureaucracy which nobody understands, and it gives to the peoples the feeling to be a very far away
alienated
power.
Actually
alien power, yes, of course. So this is what I mean when I say that as far as we speak of this part of the world, we need a European New Deal. Yes.
A new deal of ideas, perhaps, of
new deal of
spirit.
Ideas, new deal of institutions,
yeah.
New deals of imagine. For example, you are not in the euro. I am as a French.
Yeah.
Nothing is more stupid than the banknotes of the euro. Nothing is. I don't know. I would like to know who is the stupid brain who invented these bills, which are totally abstract, who don't... I know that money does not make dream, of course, but...
Well...
No, yes, but at least if there was on the banknotes of euro, European faces, as there was on the franc, as there was on the money of it, on the lire of Italy, instead of this neo-Mondrian false landscapes which are in the euro, it will be something else. This is a symbol. This is a symptom of this cold, abstract, out of nerve, out of flesh conception of euro, which is at stake today.
But Monsieur Lévy, the only people I see who are really truly rebelling against what you're saying, the bureaucracy, this alienation, these stupid banknotes, etc., are the people from the radical fringes, the lefts and the right wings. What about all of us here? Well, at least us, the centrist, more or less. Maybe we're a bit liberal, maybe we're a bit social, whatever. But we're not really protesting against this. We're not really attacking the European elite. I mean, how do we address this issue? You can hear I'm frustrated.
I see that.
Would you be my shrink?
I hope you will find a way.
I'm not really sure.
I hope you will find a way. Or let's have a new program next year. Speaking of that,
yeah.
There is a lot of ways. You spoke of Barroso, for example. I don't know the man, but I never believe. I think it is always a weakness to make a bear on a man the responsibility of a situation. If the president of the Commission was a real emanation of the peoples, if there was a way of nomination which made him accountable in front of the peoples and not only in front of people, it may change. Maybe Barroso himself would be a different man. You know, maybe he will be a different man. I don't know him. I have nothing against, nothing for.
Oh, maybe he'll be a dreamer one day.
Election of a president on suffrage universel would be a way. Common defense would be a way. Common to apply really the parameters to the economic parameters of euro, to implement them in the rules of budget will be a way. To invent at the European scale a way of there is in most of the European countries, there is a sort of unsaid right to survive. I mean, you have people who have a job, you have people who have not a job but who have an indemnity of chômage, unemployed, and you have people who are out of the system but they have something. They are leftover of the system, but thanks God, this is a real progress of the last decades. In France, there is something which is called the RSA, which is a minimum revenue guaranteed, and there is, in other names, in most of the European countries, you have that. You have the right for any citizen to have the vital minimum. If that was recognized at the European scale, if it was the same in all countries of Europe, and if this minimum revenue, minimum income, if this minimum income was given and signed by a European fund, it would cost much less than to save only one bank. I don't speak of all the mess of 2008. It will cost not. Then you would have a lot of citizens of Europe who would understand what Europe is, which would have a vital link of life with Europe.
It's a vision, let's just call it that. But I'm not really sure, not that I know Barroso personally, but I'm not really sure that idea presented to him or any other European leaders would be well received.
Let's see the next Barroso. Let's see what he will think.
Yeah.
But I mean that with will, with ambition and with determination, there is a lot of things to do, and there is not fatality of this slow decay of Europe we are seeing now.
Right. Finally, Monsieur, because we're actually nearing the end of our time for this conversation. As you pointed out, I'm a bit pessimistic. I'm not a great thinker, but unlike you. But I do look at the developments in the Middle East, in Europe, with a lot of concern. You seem to be, on the whole, less pessimistic. Could you just tell me, perhaps in a few words, finally, what gives you true hope for the future? Just to help me, before I go home.
I could not say that in a few words. I am like most of people. I cannot accept resignation. This is one of the resources of mankind. When the worst is here, we don't admit the worst. There is two symmetric tendencies. There is the progressist tendency and the pessimistic one. There is a way which is to say that whatever I do, whatever I try, the history goes in the good side. For example, Europe is so well inscribed in the sense of history that even if we don't do anything, even if we sleep in the rear seat of the car, Europe will develop. There is a progressism of Europe in which we were bred, by the way. We were bred, in this idea that Europe was a sort of necessity. This is a big mistake which was committed by your previous generation. We could remember of many moments in the history of Europe when Europe was about to be built and when it was debuilt by this laziness of the spirit, believing that it is done and that we have just to push a little that it will bloom. This is a big mistake. The other mistake is the pessimistic tendency, the opposite of Karl Marx, let's say Spengler or things like that, to think that there is a symmetrical tendency to decay, a necessary law of entropia, that humanity is a damned species which is doomed to the worst. You have a lot of people, a lot of thinkers in Europe who thought that. I think that it is another mistake. And my way of thinking, but also of being in my life, with my friend, with my family, and so on, is to try to draw a line between the two, is to try to find a path between these two dead ends. It is two dead ends. And between the two dead ends, there is a sort of narrow path which is possible if we are a lot to believe in it.
Monsieur. Merci.